There is a strange tragedy unfolding in modern life. Men are achieving more than ever, yet feeling less than ever. On paper, they are winning. They have careers, accomplishments, degrees, physical improvements, opportunities, and in many cases, more comfort than any generation before them. And yet beneath all of it lies a quiet, growing emptiness, a gnawing hollowness that no success seems able to fill. This is the paradox of modern achievement: victory without identity, success without self, a life full of trophies and empty of meaning. Nietzsche saw this future long before it arrived. He warned of the last man, a creature who accomplishes everything society tells him to, but feels nothing when he arrives, a man who wins the game, only to discover the game was never designed to lead him toward meaning, a man who follows the map perfectly, only to realize that the destination is a void. Today, that prophecy has matured. Men climb ladders without knowing why. They chase goals they never question. They obey expectations they never chose. They build lives that don't actually feel like their own. To the outside world, they look successful. To the inside world, they feel lost, because success without self-awareness is just performance. It is motion without direction. It is effort without truth. It is achievement without identity, and that kind of success leaves a man empty. The hollowness begins subtly. A quiet restlessness, a sense of, is this it? A discomfort that no accomplishment can silence. He gets the promotion but feels no ascent. He buys the car but feels no arrival. He improves his status but feels no elevation. It's not depression, it's not failure, it's not weakness. It is misalignment. When a man builds a life based on external expectations rather than internal truth, he becomes a stranger inside his own achievements. He looks at his life and recognizes the pieces, yet cannot find himself in any of them. Everything fits, but none of it feels like him. This is the hollow victory. And it happens because modern men are raised on scripts, not on self-inquiry. They are trained to succeed before they are taught to understand who they are. They are encouraged to chase achievement before they even know what they value. They are pushed to build a life before they discover what life means to them. So they pursue the default goals: make money, get respect, be desirable, perform well, look successful, fit the mold. But no one ever asks them, what do you want? And worse, no one teaches them how to answer that question. So they climb a ladder that leads them somewhere, but not home. Nietzsche believed that a man who does not know himself will always be ruled by external forces. And today, these forces are stronger, louder, and more persistent than ever. Social pressure, digital comparison, cultural expectation, material benchmarks, masculine stereotypes, achievement culture, productivity obsession. A modern man wakes up surrounded by demands for performance, but starved of anything that connects him to who he actually is. And when a man achieves success that is disconnected from his identity, the victory becomes hollow. His accomplishments become decoration, not nourishment. His life becomes architecture without foundation. Success cannot fill a man who does not know what makes him feel alive. The most painful part, nobody notices his emptiness. To the world, he looks admirable, disciplined, competent, high-achieving. People envy his life without knowing it sits on a quiet ache. But inside himself, he senses the truth. He is winning the wrong battles. He is climbing the wrong mountains. He is building a life that demands constant effort but gives him no energy back. He pours himself into a role that never gives him himself in return. And here lies Nietzsche's darkest diagnosis. A man without an inner world cannot be fulfilled by the outer world. It does not matter how much he wins. It does not matter how impressive his life becomes. It does not matter how many others admire him. A man disconnected from himself will feel empty, even at his peak, because victories that are not rooted in identity do not nourish the soul. They only numb it temporarily. This emptiness grows every time he achieves something and still feels the void. It grows every time he realizes his effort has not brought him closer to himself. It grows every time he succeeds in ways that do not feel authentic. It grows every time the world congratulates him, but his inner voice remains silent. And eventually, he begins to sense the truth. He has built a life that looks impressive to everyone except him, But this realization, though painful, is also the doorway to transformation. The hollow victory is not a failure. It is a signal, a summons, a diagnosis pointing toward something essential. You cannot outsource meaning. You cannot borrow identity. You cannot inherit purpose. You cannot purchase fulfillment. You cannot perform your way into feeling whole. You must build meaning from the inside out. To escape the hollow victory, a man must begin a different kind of journey, not one of external expansion, but of internal excavation. He must ask himself frightening questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I actually desire? Not what looks impressive. What values feel truly mine, not learned or inherited? What pursuits energize me, not just reward me? What identity feels honest, not socially validated? Most men avoid these questions because they dismantle the illusion of success they've built their lives on. These questions require solitude, honesty, discomfort, silence, all the qualities modern life trains men to avoid. But the man who is brave enough to ask them begins reclaiming himself, because the real victory is not achieving what the world wants from you, but discovering what you want from yourself. The hollow victory becomes a turning point when a man stops chasing the life society handed him and starts building the life his soul demands. He shifts from performance to purpose, from imitation to individuality, from external validation to internal truth, from achievement to alignment. And once alignment appears, even in small doses, the emptiness begins to recede. Not all at once, but steadily. He begins to feel connected to the life he is creating. His accomplishments start to feel like expressions of his identity, not disguises for it. His victories begin to nourish him instead of drain him. His path begins to feel like a homecoming instead of an escape. This is the real victory, success that aligns with self. A man who knows himself cannot feel empty. A man who understands his purpose cannot feel hollow. A man who builds his life from inner truth will never feel lost, even when the world doesn't understand him. The hollow victory is a warning, but it is also an invitation, the beginning of a deeper, truer kind of strength, because the man who finally chooses himself can never lose. There is a moment, subtle, almost invisible, when a man stops hearing himself. Not because he no longer has a voice, but because the world becomes louder than his own mind. The noise of modern life, the constant stimulation, the relentless demands for attention drown out the quiet internal signal that once guided him. And slowly, over months and years, the inner world begins to fade. Nietzsche foresaw this collapse long before phones, notifications, or social feeds existed. He warned of a future where the inner life, the place where meaning, desire, identity, and direction are formed, would be crushed under the weight of external noise. A future where men would lose the ability to think deeply, feel authentically, or desire genuinely. A future where they could no longer hear themselves. That future is here. The modern man is surrounded by loudness disguised as importance, headlines engineered to provoke, platforms calibrated to stimulate, opinions amplified to manipulate, algorithms crafted to occupy his attention, a digital world optimized to keep him reactive instead of reflective. The result? Men who feel everything, yet understand nothing. Men who are constantly stimulated, but rarely moved. Men who consume endlessly, but never digest any of it. Men who live from reaction, rather than intention. The inner world, the place where a man once confronted himself, sharpened himself, and discovered who he was, has gone quiet. Not because it died, but because he stopped visiting it. Silence has become uncomfortable. Stillness has become unnatural. Reflection has become rare. And the tragedy of it all is that the inner world does not disappear suddenly. It decays slowly, quietly, like a forgotten room in a house that is still fully inhabited. At first, a man feels slightly disconnected from his desires. He doesn't know what he wants, but assumes clarity will come later. Then he stops feeling true excitement. Joy becomes muted. Passions become blurry. Then he stops understanding his emotions. He feels anxiety, but not its cause. He feels pressure, but not its direction. He feels emptiness, but not its origin. And eventually, he stops hearing his inner voice entirely. He becomes a man guided not by himself, but by whatever external force is loudest at the moment. This is the death of the inner world, and it is more dangerous than failure, heartbreak, or loss, Because when a man cannot hear himself, he becomes a passenger in his own life. He drifts, he follows, he imitates, he conforms, he reacts, he adapts, he survives, but he no longer leads himself. Nietzsche believed that the collapse of the inner life would lead to a generation of men who look alive but feel dead inside, men who function, work, achieve, and survive, but who have lost the inner compass that makes life meaningful. And he was right. Modern men are losing themselves not through dramatic collapse, but through gradual abandonment. They avoid solitude. They avoid introspection. They avoid silence, not because they hate it, but because they fear what they might discover inside it. Silence exposes truth. Truth demands action. Action demands courage. And courage is easier to perform externally than to apply internally. So men choose distraction. They choose stimulation. They choose noise. They choose comfort. They choose anything that keeps them from hearing the voice that asks the real question. Are you living as the man you are meant to be? Because the moment a man hears that question, truly hears it, the illusion of his current life begins to crack. The comforts lose their taste. The achievements feel thin. The relationships feel shallow. The identity he built starts to feel like a costume. And this discomfort is unbearable when a man has lost the skills needed to rebuild himself from within. The inner world dies when a man forgets how to be alone with himself, when he fills every empty moment with stimulation, when he uses noise to drown out discomfort, when he mistakes distraction for relief, when he no longer remembers the sound of his own thoughts. When this happens, he loses three essential things. 1. He loses inner direction. Without an inner voice, he cannot tell what he truly wants. He chases goals handed to him by culture, peers, trends, or expectations. 2. He loses inner depth. Without introspection, he becomes emotional surface level, reactive instead of rooted. 3. He loses inner identity. Without solitude, he forgets the unique shape of his own soul. A man without an inner world becomes predictable, influenceable, and mentally fragile. He becomes dependent on external validation to feel alive. He becomes the kind of man Nietzsche feared, the easily controlled man, the distracted man, the shallow man. But here is the paradox. The death of the inner world is not permanent. It can be revived. It can be rebuilt. It can be awakened. But doing so requires the one thing modern men avoid more than anything else: confronting themselves. To hear oneself again, a man must walk back into silence. He must reclaim moments of stillness. He must withdraw from noise long enough for to let his mind recalibrate. He must sit with his discomfort until it transforms into clarity. The first step is always the same. Stop running. Stop filling every second with stimulation. Stop drowning stress in escape. Stop feeding the mind with constant noise. Stop numbing the inner world because it feels unfamiliar. A quiet man is not a weak man. A quiet man is a man who is finally listening, and when he listens long enough, the inner voice returns. Faint at first, then clearer, then strong enough to lead again. The inner world doesn't need perfection to revive. It needs attention. It needs presence. It needs curiosity. It needs honesty. And little by little, a man begins to hear what he actually desires, not what he's been told to pursue. What he actually believes, not what he feels pressured to signal. What he actually values, not what society glamorizes. What he actually feels, not what he is expected to feel. This return of the inner voice is not dramatic. It is subtle, but it changes everything. The man who begins hearing himself again becomes harder to manipulate, harder to distract, harder to break. His decisions become intentional, his emotions become understood, his desires become authentic, his identity becomes real. He begins to live life as a participant, not a spectator, as a creator, not a consumer, as an individual, not an echo. And eventually, he realizes something profound. The world didn't silence his inner voice. He abandoned it. But the moment he chooses to listen again, really listen, the inner world resurrects. And with it comes a strength incomparable to anything external, because a man who hears himself cannot be lost. A man who knows himself cannot be empty. A man who returns to his inner world becomes whole again. And wholeness, not success, is the real victory. There is a strange contradiction woven into modern life. Men have more access to pleasure than any generation in history, yet they feel more empty, restless, and directionless than ever. The world is overflowing with stimulation, instant entertainment, instant attention, instant gratification, and yet modern men walk through life feeling numb, not because they lack pleasure, but because pleasure has replaced meaning. Nietzsche feared this type of future, a world where people would choose comfort over depth, stimulation over substance, seduction over self-transformation. He warned that a society addicted to ease would produce individuals who become incapable of confronting the real demands of meaning, men who would choose the rush instead of the responsibility, the dopamine hit instead of the deeper human experience. Today, that warning has evolved into a reality so pervasive that we barely recognize it for what it is. We are drowning in pleasure and starving for fulfillment. The modern world offers endless ways to feel good quickly, with no effort, no commitment, and no cost except the erosion of your inner life. Every swipe, click, scroll, or tap delivers a controlled burst of dopamine, a tiny chemical high that tricks the mind into believing something meaningful happened. But nothing meaningful did. You felt something, but you became nothing. And this is the tyranny of dopamine. It gives you the sensation of life without the substance of life. Men today confuse stimulation with satisfaction. They confuse arousal with intimacy. They confuse distraction with peace. They confuse consumption with creation. They confuse the rush with purpose. Dopamine is not the enemy. It is a natural chemical that motivates us toward reward. But in the modern environment, dopamine has been weaponized. You are rewarded for consuming, not for creating. You are rewarded for reacting, not for acting. You are rewarded for scrolling, not for building. You are rewarded for indulging, not for growing. Your brain is being conditioned to seek short loops of stimulation instead of long arcs of fulfillment. And over time, this conditioning reshapes the architecture of your desires. You stop desiring depth. You stop desiring effort. You stop desiring slow, meaningful development. You crave shortcuts. You crave the next hit. You crave rapid cycles of more. The tragedy is subtle. Men lose their appetite for life long before they realize it. It begins with a small erosion, videos replacing reading, scrolling replacing thinking, pornography replacing intimacy, constant stimulation replacing reflection. The brain adapts to the easy pleasure, and suddenly the meaningful pleasure begins to feel too difficult, too slow, too demanding. Why suffer through discomfort when stimulation is one tap away? Why wrestle with purpose when entertainment is endless? Why work through boredom when algorithms will eliminate it? Why cultivate discipline when dopamine provides instant reward? Nietzsche would call this the psychological sedative of modernity, a pleasure so easily accessed that it numbs the soul. The tyranny of dopamine doesn't destroy men directly. It weakens them internally. It leaves men overstimulated and underdeveloped. It takes from them the ability to feel genuine fulfillment because fulfillment requires patience, struggle, sacrifice, and commitment, qualities the dopamine-addicted mind avoids instinctively. Pleasure is easy. Fulfillment is earned. Pleasure is passive. Fulfillment is active. Pleasure fades quickly. Fulfillment deepens over time. This is why modern men, despite their access to constant stimulation, feel increasingly empty. They are full of experiences but starved of meaning. Fulfillment demands depth. Dopamine demands novelty. Fulfillment demands engagement. Dopamine demands escape. Fulfillment demands contribution. Dopamine demands consumption. Fulfillment demands facing yourself. Dopamine demands running from yourself. And so men run. They run into hyperstimulation, porn instead of intimacy, quick entertainment instead of deep work, comfort food instead of vitality, social media attention instead of genuine connection, video games instead of real-world mastery, and with each escape, the inner world weakens. The self becomes faint. The inner voice becomes quiet. The inner fire becomes dim. Pleasure without fulfillment creates a man who feels restless even when he is relaxed, a man who feels empty even when he is entertained, a man who feels distracted even when nothing is wrong, a man who feels overwhelmed even though he has never lived an uncomfortably demanding life. This is the paradox. His life is too easy to feel meaningful. Dopamine was meant to be the reward for meaningful effort, not the replacement for it. It was meant to motivate you toward challenge, not toward avoidance. When dopamine becomes detached from effort, it becomes destructive. A man who indulges in pleasure without purpose eventually loses the ability to enjoy purpose at all. He becomes impatient. He becomes unfocused. He becomes bored with everything real. He becomes dependent on stimulation to feel alive. Life feels dull because his brain has adapted to artificial intensity. Conversations feel slow. Ambition feels tiring. Relationships feel demanding. Goals feel too far away. Work feels pointless. Everything becomes too quiet compared to the constant noise delivered by dopamine-driven habits. But the worst part is this: the more he indulges in pleasure, the more hollow he becomes. Because pleasure is a moment, not a meaning. And when moments replace meaning, emptiness replaces fulfillment. This is why men feel lost, even when they have abundance. This is why men feel numb, even when they have comfort. This is why men feel dissatisfied, even when everything in their life looks fine. Pleasure has become a prison. But here is the truth Nietzsche pointed toward. Meaning requires friction. You cannot feel fulfilled without struggle. You cannot feel proud without effort. You cannot feel alive without challenge. You cannot build identity without persistence. Fulfillment comes from the things that require something of you. The things that ask for sacrifice, discipline, devotion, courage, and commitment. Pleasure gives you a high. Fulfillment gives you a foundation. Pleasure stimulates your senses. Fulfillment strengthens your soul. Pleasure consumes you. Fulfillment expands you. To escape the tyranny of dopamine, a man must reclaim difficulty. He must reintroduce friction into his life. He must rebuild his relationship with effort. He must choose depth over novelty, creation over consumption, discomfort over sedation. This does not mean rejecting pleasure. It means dethroning it. It means putting pleasure back in its proper place. A reward for meaningful action, not a replacement for it. Only then can a man feel whole again. Only then can the inner world awaken. Only then does life regain weight, color, intensity, and truth. Because fulfillment is not found in stimulation, it is found in becoming. And the man who chooses becoming over escaping, the man who chooses purpose over pleasure, the man who chooses meaning over dopamine, that man becomes powerful again. Modern society prides itself on being gentle, agreeable, and comfortably safe. It praises tolerance, conformity, and emotional neutrality. It teaches softness as virtue and frames depth, intensity, ambition, and self-assertion as threatening or outdated. And in this climate, Nietzsche's warning echoes louder than ever. When a society weakens its values, it weakens its men. Not because men are naturally harsh or violent, but because strength, real internal strength, requires confrontation, responsibility, clarity, and courage. And a culture built on soft morality discourages all of them. Soft morality is not kindness. Soft morality is comfort elevated into a worldview. It is the avoidance of friction, the worship of ease, and the belief that struggle itself is a flaw rather than a necessary condition of growth. It is the morality of the last man, the man Nietzsche saw coming, comfortable, harmless, obedient, emotionally fragile, dismissive of greatness, suspicious of strength, allergic to depth, spiritually sedated. He is not evil. He is not destructive. He is simply weak because the values he inherited were weak, and he cannot hear his own soul beneath the soft expectations imposed on him. Modern men are burdened with this inheritance. They are taught implicitly and explicitly that the highest virtue is to avoid discomfort, to avoid conflict, to avoid offense, to avoid ambition that might intimidate others, to avoid intensity that might stand out, to avoid expressing anything that disrupts the emotional equilibrium of the group. The result? Men who shrink themselves instead of strengthen themselves. Men who silence themselves instead of shape themselves. Men who internalize softness as morality and strength as something vaguely immoral. Soft morality does not make better men. Soft morality makes hollow men, because the values you live by either sharpen you or soften you. They either push you upward or drag you inward. They either expand your capacity or reduce your ambition. There is no neutrality. A man becomes the shape of the values he internalizes. Nietzsche believed values determine destiny, not just individual destiny, but cultural destiny. Weak values produce weak individuals. Strong values produce strong individuals. And today's values demand weakness. Consider what modern culture praises in men. Be agreeable, not assertive. Be soft-spoken, not strong-voiced. Blend in, don't stand out. Don't pursue too hard, it looks obsessive. Don't think too deeply, it makes people uncomfortable. Don't have strong convictions, they might offend someone. Don't express ambition, it threatens the mediocre. Don't prioritize yourself, prioritize everyone's feelings. Modern morality trains men to amputate their intensity, to amputate their desire, to amputate their inner fire. And a man without a fire cannot lead, cannot confront, cannot create, cannot protect, cannot rise, cannot become. He becomes compliant, but not complete, pleasant, but not powerful, present, but not alive. Weak values convince men that strength is dangerous, that self-direction is selfish, that boundaries are rude, that ambition is oppressive, that masculinity itself is suspicious. But here is the paradox. A man who rejects strength does not become peaceful. He becomes powerless. He becomes dependent on systems, on crowds, on approval, on emotional validation from others. He becomes someone who avoids moral complexity because he has been raised on simplistic, soft narratives that give him no tools to navigate real life. Soft morality tells him, don't make people uncomfortable. But power, truth, and growth are all uncomfortable. Soft morality tells him, don't impose your will. But self-respect requires setting your will against resistance. Soft morality tells him, just be kind. But kindness without strength is submission. Soft morality tells him, fit in. But meaning requires standing apart. Nietzsche feared this world, not because he disliked compassion or empathy, but because he understood that values must challenge individuals, not sedate them. Morality, he believed, should strengthen the soul, not numb it. Soft morality numbs. A man raised in this environment grows up morally malnourished. He has a conscience trained to avoid assertiveness. He has a moral framework that punishes intensity. He has values that prioritize comfort over character. He has an inner voice that apologizes for existing. He has instincts that have been dulled by years of emotional smoothing. He feels guilty for wanting more. He feels wrong for being competitive. He feels ashamed of ambition. He feels afraid of conflict. He feels uncomfortable with his own power. He feels disconnected from his deeper masculine nature. He becomes a man who cannot decide, cannot stand firm, cannot take risk, cannot face fear, cannot build a life that demands strength. The tragedy is not that these men are bad. The tragedy is that they are unformed. Soft morality leaves men half-developed, full-grown bodies with underdeveloped inner worlds. And when weak values shape a generation, the consequences ripple. Men feel empty because they never build inner strength. Men feel anxious because they never learn confrontation. Men feel lost because they never define their own moral framework. Men feel disempowered because they were taught empowerment is dangerous. Men feel directionless because modern values offer no depth or fire. The result is the modern masculine crisis. Men who feel hollow even when they succeed. Men who feel lost even when they follow the rules. Men who feel ashamed of their own potential for intensity and greatness. Nietzsche would look at this and diagnose it simply. You inherited values that weaken you. Because strong men do not emerge from soft morality. They emerge from values that demand effort, resilience, self-creation, discipline, and confrontation with reality. To reverse the hollowing out of the modern man, he must replace inherited values with chosen ones. He must rebuild morality not as comfort, but as character, not as compliance, but as integrity, not as submission, but as sovereignty. He must create a value system that strengthens rather than softens. Values like depth over distraction, discipline over indulgence, truth over social approval, responsibility over comfort, purpose over pleasure, self-direction over conformity, strength over emotional fragility, authenticity over social performance. These are not hard values. They are human values sharpened by life, not dulled by fear. A man who lives by these values becomes grounded, not aggressive, stable, not harsh, centered, not chaotic, alive, not anesthetized. He regrows an inner spine. He regains a moral center. He reclaims psychological autonomy. He becomes a man with gravity, and gravity is what men have been missing. When a man possesses internal gravity, he no longer bends to every soft expectation placed upon him. He no longer fears his own strength. He no longer apologizes for his depth. He no longer hides his ambition. He no longer conforms to values that weaken him. He chooses values that reflect who he is meant to become, not who society prefers him to be. Because Nietzsche's message was not an attack on morality, it was a plea for strong morality. A morality that cultivates greatness. A morality that builds depth. A morality that challenges the individual to rise. A morality that does not soften men into neutrality, but shapes them into individuals of character, intensity, and clarity. Weak values create weak men. Strong values create men worth becoming. And the man who rebuilds his values from the inside out will never feel hollow again. Because his strength comes from a moral backbone he forged himself. There is a loneliness in modern men that goes far deeper than isolation. It is not the loneliness of being physically alone. It is the loneliness of being spiritually unanchored. Men today are disconnected in a way that past generations could not imagine. They are men without tribes, without missions, without solid identities. Men drifting through a world that offers endless options but no real belonging. Endless distraction, but no real purpose. Nietzsche foresaw this breakdown. He warned of a future where the structures that once gave men meaning, community, responsibility, initiation, purpose, would collapse. When that happened, he said, men would not become freer. They would become adrift, untethered, vulnerable to emptiness, vulnerable to nihilism, vulnerable to losing themselves completely. Today, the prophecy stands fulfilled. Modern men are disconnected not because they are weak, but because the world they live in has removed the anchors men once relied on to become themselves. 1. No tribe. The collapse of male brotherhood. For most of human history, men existed within a tribe, literal or symbolic. A group of other men who shared purpose, culture, lineage, and responsibility. A tribe gave a man 3 essential things: identity, who he is; direction, where he's going; responsibility, why it matters. Without a tribe, a man becomes psychologically floatless. But modern men have lost this completely. They live in isolated suburbs, work in individualistic environments, socialize on fragmented platforms, and compete socially instead of bonding deeply. Friendships are shallow, sporadic, transactional, or purely digital. Male vulnerability is stigmatized, and male excellence is equally policed. Men now stand alone in a way no generation before them ever had to. What happens when a man has no tribe? He becomes hyper-independent, yet emotionally malnourished. He becomes outwardly strong, yet inwardly unsupported. He becomes self-reliant, yet spiritually starved. He carries burdens that were meant to be shared. He hides struggles that were meant to be voiced. He walks alone through battles that were meant to be fought together. And internally, he begins to fracture. Because a man is not designed to become himself in isolation, he becomes himself in relation to other strong men who challenge him, sharpen him, guide him, and hold him accountable. Without a tribe, a man begins to lose the contours of his identity. He becomes a psychological ghost, seen by many, but known by none. 2. No mission. Comfort instead of purpose. The modern world gives men comfort, not direction, safety, not meaning, pleasure, not purpose. But a man does not feel alive through comfort. A man feels alive through struggle towards something meaningful. Mission is not optional for a man. Mission is a psychological necessity. Without something to fight for, build toward, or commit himself to, a man slowly deteriorates. His drive weakens. His clarity fades. His spirit goes dormant. He becomes restless, irritable, numbed by stimulation but starved of purpose. Men today live without missions because the world keeps them overstimulated. Society discourages ambition that stands out. Corporate structures offer labor but not legacy. Schools teach compliance but not calling. Media promotes consumption, not contribution. Culture rewards passivity, not purpose. A man without a mission becomes addicted to substitutes. Entertainment instead of mastery, pleasure instead of passion, escapism instead of evolution, distraction instead of direction. He fills the empty space where mission should be with noise, dopamine, or passive routines. But these substitutions cannot nourish him. They can only numb him, and the numbing is temporary. Deep down, he feels the truth. He is not living the life he was built for. A man who has no mission does not feel defeated. He feels unused. He feels like potential left on the shelf. 3. No identity. The hollowing of the modern self-identity used to be formed through tribe role, struggle, responsibility, tradition, initiation, purpose. Men were shaped through rites of passage, mentorship, hardship, and contribution. Identity was earned. Today, identity is purchased, performed, or constructed through comparison. Men define themselves through achievements, appearances, social perception, trends, online personas, algorithmic feedback. Identity has shifted from something internal and earned to something external and fragile identities crumble under pressure. A man without a solid identity becomes uncertain under criticism, easily manipulated, emotionally inconsistent, dependent on external validation, unable to stand alone, confused about who he is. When a man loses touch with himself, he becomes vulnerable to everything outside himself. He begins to absorb the values of the crowd, the fears of society, the expectations of others, and the anxiety of the culture around him. He becomes shaped by forces he doesn't even see. Nietzsche believed that when a man's inner world collapses, he becomes the last man, comfortable, weak, directionless, shaped by the world rather than shaping it. A man who avoids responsibility, avoids courage, avoids intensity, avoids ambition because he has no internal structure guiding him. The disconnected man is not hopeless. He is unshaped. Here is the hardest truth. Most modern men are not broken. They are uninitiated. They were never given a tribe to belong to, a mission to commit to, a template for identity, a structure of masculine development, older men to guide them, challenges that reveal who they are. They were raised in a world that removed all the mechanisms that produce strong men, and then wondered why men feel lost. This is not a personal failure. This is a cultural failure. But a disconnected man, once he becomes aware of his disconnect, can begin to rebuild himself from the inside out. His reconstruction begins with 3 essential steps. 1. Recreate tribe, even if it's small. A tribe today doesn't need to be large. It needs to be real. 1 or 2 men who challenge, support, and sharpen you are enough to restart the psychological machinery of belonging. Brotherhood is oxygen for a man's spirit. 2. Define your mission, even if it's narrow. Your mission does not need to be grand. It only needs to be authentic. A mission gives shape to your energy. It aligns your mind. It creates forward motion. It grounds your identity. Without mission, the self drifts. With mission, the self grows. 3. Rebuild identity from the inside, not the outside. Identity is formed through solitude, self-honesty, struggle, discipline, creation, commitment. A man builds identity when he stops asking, "What should I be?" and begins asking, "What must I become?" Identity is the structure that prevents the soul from collapsing. The reconnection of the modern man. When a man reconnects with tribe, mission, and identity, something powerful returns. His presence becomes grounded. His decisions become clear. His energy becomes directed. His emotions become stable. His inner voice becomes audible again. He stops drifting. He starts becoming. He stops absorbing. He starts shaping. He stops surviving. He starts living with purpose. Because a connected man, a man who belongs to something, who fights for something, who knows who he is a man impossible to hollow out. And that man is the first step toward restoring the strength the modern world has tried to erase. Modern life has produced a crisis that no amount of success, comfort, or stimulation can solve. The crisis of meaning. Men today are surrounded by abundance, yet plagued by emptiness. They have access to everything except the one thing they need most, a reason to exist that feels true to their soul. Nietzsche foresaw this collapse long before it arrived. He saw that the old sources of meaning, tradition, religion, tribe, duty, would decay. He predicted that modernity, with all its comforts and freedoms, would eventually create a new kind of suffering, the suffering of the man who no longer knows why he is alive. And Nietzsche was right. Modern men are not dying from starvation or war. They are dying from purposelessness. But Nietzsche did not see this crisis as the end. He saw it as the beginning, the necessary emptiness before a rebirth, the collapse required for a new kind of man to emerge. And that man The one Nietzsche challenged the world to give birth to is the self-created man, not defined by society, not shaped by collective expectations, not determined by tradition. A man who creates his own meaning, his own values, his own direction. A man who becomes the architect of himself. This is Nietzsche's great call, his greatest demand. Do not inherit your life, create it. And in a world where meaning has collapsed, this call has become more urgent than ever. The death before the rebirth. Before the rebirth of meaning can happen, a man must face something terrifying. The death of the old. The moment when the inherited values no longer speak to him. The moment when the goals society told him to chase feel hollow. The moment when achievement no longer satisfies the soul. The moment when the rules he followed feel arbitrary. The moment when the life he built feels like a mask. This collapse is not a failure. It is an awakening. Nietzsche believed that meaning must die before a deeper meaning can be born, that a man must lose the false purpose handed to him by others in order to uncover the purpose he was born to create. The collapse feels like despair, but underneath, it is opportunity, because only when the old self dissolves can the real self emerge. Why meaning cannot be inherited. The modern world tells men to search for meaning. Nietzsche says, stop searching, start creating. Meaning cannot be found like a treasure buried somewhere. Meaning is not given to you by society, family, or religion. Meaning is not discovered. It is constructed. Every man must build his meaning the same way he builds strength, discipline, and identity, through conscious action, personal responsibility, and courageous self-inquiry. Meaning that is inherited is never internal. Meaning that is inherited is never stable. Meaning that is inherited collapses at the first sign of crisis. Only meaning that arises from the deepest part of a man's soul can survive the storms of life. Nietzsche's radical idea was this: a man does not find meaning, he earns it by shaping himself, by confronting himself, by creating himself. The self-created man. Nietzsche's vision of human greatness. Nietzsche believed that the highest form of humanity is not the obedient man or the successful man, but the self-created man, the man who becomes what he wills himself to be. This man creates his own values, writes his own code, defines his own purpose, chooses his own mission, lives by his inner voice, not the crowd's, shapes his identity with intention, turns life into a work of art. This man is not born, he is forged. He is built through solitude, self-discipline, honest introspection, and the courage to walk a path that no one else understands. He does not ask, what should I do? He asks, what must I create? He does not ask, who should I be? He asks, who am I willing to become? He does not look for approval, he looks for authenticity. He does not borrow values, he crafts them. This man is rare because he takes responsibility for the one thing most men avoid, being the author of his own life. Why modern men struggle with meaning. Men today have unprecedented freedom, but also unprecedented confusion. They are told, you can be anything, but not how to decide what to be. You can do anything, but not how to choose what matters. You can reinvent yourself, but not how to build a self-worth reinventing. And so, men drift from job to job, from relationship to relationship, from distraction to distraction, from identity to identity. They drift because the world removed the structures that once shaped men, but gave them nothing to replace it with. Nietzsche saw this coming. When the old framework collapses, the average man collapses with it. But the exceptional man rises, because freedom is not easy. It is heavy, and it crushes those who have no inner architecture to hold it. Meaning cannot be reborn until a man builds that inner architecture. How meaning is reborn? Inside a man. Nietzsche believed that meaning begins with one thing, a decision. A man must decide to take responsibility for himself. Without that decision, nothing changes. Meaning is reborn through a series of internal shifts. 1. The shift from consumption to creation. You stop numbing yourself with distraction and begin building something real. Creation gives meaning. Consumption steals it. 2. The shift from external validation to internal alignment. You stop asking, will they approve, and start asking, does this align with who I want to become? 3. The shift from avoidance to confrontation. Meaning grows when you confront your truth, your fears, your desires, your weaknesses. Avoidance kills meaning. Confrontation resurrects it. 4. The shift from comfort to responsibility. Meaning lives where struggle exists, where commitment exists, where responsibility exists. A man becomes meaningful by carrying something heavy that matters. 5. The shift. From being reactive to being vision-driven, the man without meaning reacts. The man with meaning directs. He acts not out of impulse, but out of purpose. Meaning is born when a man creates himself. The rebirth of meaning is not dramatic. It is gradual, quiet, and deeply personal. It happens when a man finally says, I will no longer drift. I will no longer borrow my identity. I will no longer let society define my purpose. I will create myself. That moment is the real beginning because the man who creates himself becomes unbreakable. He becomes self-guided. He becomes internally grounded. He becomes sovereign. His life gains weight. His actions gain purpose. His struggles gain direction. His victories gain depth. He becomes a man of meaning, not because he discovered it, but because he built it. The final truth: meaning is a forge, not a gift. Nietzsche's call is not a gentle one. Meaning is not inherited. Meaning is not found in comfort. Meaning is not gifted by society. Meaning is forged in solitude, forged in struggle, forged in self-honesty, forged in creation, forged in becoming. And the man who forges meaning in himself becomes someone the world cannot break, someone the world cannot define, someone the world cannot hollow out. He becomes the self-created man, the man Nietzsche believed would rise from the collapse of the old world. And when he does, the death of meaning becomes its rebirth.